How do I not let anxiety control me? Hey guys, I'm Showman. I want to challenge the way you think, and today I want to talk about this fundamental question. How do I not let anxiety control me? And instead, how do I actually control my anxiety or my stress? Before we actually begin, keep in mind that this is just my own interpretation of how I thrive with anxiety, or how I don't let anxiety control my life. This is by no means the only way, but I think that this is a good way. So please, if you're watching this, watch it with an open mind, and watch it in the sense of, does this guy make sense? Does his logic make sense? Do I want to try it? If yes, try it. If no, that is fine. You don't need to do it. But if you do try it and it doesn't work, well, worst case scenario, you wasted 10 minutes. So with that little warning out of the way, how do we manage our anxiety? Or how do I manage my anxiety? Well, I think the fundamental way of actually managing it is through a quick shift in perspective of what anxiety actually is. Now, this is going to be a little bit of an out there perspective, but I think if we shift our perspective from anxiety being this big bad beast that we need to slay with a sword, instead if we shift our perspective from this big bad person or big bad monster to a friend that means well, but that is slightly misguided in the way he means well. This is a bit out there, but let me give you my quick reasoning as to why I think this perspective is so helpful. First, anxiety ultimately is a mechanism for you to survive and for you to reproduce. It comes from you being anxious of tall grass because there might be a tiger in that tall grass. And so those of us that were anxious because there might be a tiger in the tall grass survive to pass on this anxiety gene. And so anxiety is hardwired into us. But anxiety gets its prompts from the outside world. Anxiety gets its prompts from the stimulus, and more importantly, from your interpretation of that stimulus. And so you kind of program these anxieties very quickly into yourself, so it takes a while to actually unroot them. Because I think one kind of a big problem with the way we cope with anxiety in the modern day is that's all we do. We kind of cope with it. You put things over top of it, but you never actually confront it. You do all this work running away from your anxiety instead of doing what I'm about to tell you. Now, this comes from Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. It's a very good book, and I suggest everyone read it. I have a link to where you can find it down below. To actually get rid of the underlying anxieties, which is what I think you need to do in order to not let them control you, but instead for you to control them, is for you to shine the light of consciousness onto it, as Eckhart Tolle says, and by doing that, you essentially make it go away. You can think of this like your friend bringing you chocolate ice cream instead of vanilla ice cream. Your friend means really well, but ultimately, he brought you chocolate instead of vanilla. Now, you want vanilla ice cream. What are you gonna do to get your friend to get you vanilla ice cream instead of chocolate? Are you gonna bash him over the head? Are you gonna run away? Or are you gonna politely tell your friend, hey, next time, let's get me some vanilla instead of chocolate? I think this is a really good shift in perspective in anxiety because ultimately it allows you to essentially tell this anxiety inside you that it is okay. You don't need to be anxious about that thing anymore. So then how do we actually bring this light of consciousness onto the anxiety so that we can reprogram what it actually perceives as a threat and what it doesn't perceive as a threat? Well, I think we do this with a bit of gratitude and a bit of thankfulness. Because ultimately, again, your anxiety is there as a helpful friend to keep you alive. It's just a little bit misguided. So let's nudge him in the right direction. So the way I go about this whenever I feel anxious is to kind of pause for a second, realize that I'm anxious, and then instead of just trying to cope with it and run away from this anxiety, I imagine it as me, as a reflection of myself. And then instead of fighting it and pushing it down and strangling it, I imagine me embracing whatever it is that I'm anxious about. Say I'm anxious about not living up to someone's expectations. I imagine the somehow embodied other person's expectations, because again, we're dealing with emotions here, not thoughts. So it doesn't have to make complete sense, but I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. So I take this expectation of what somebody's expecting from me, and I imagine that as myself, or imagine that as kind of like a voidy shape. And then I embrace it. I embrace it sometimes physically. I actually sometimes do go like this to kind of tell my anxiety that it's okay. But I embrace it within my head. I embrace it with my consciousness. And then I tell it, again, sometimes in my head, sometimes out loud, thank you so much for your concern. But this is not a problem. This is just something in your head. And though I appreciate what you're trying to do, let's let it go. And as I'm doing this, I'm taking a deep breath in, and I'm imagining all of this negative energy, all of this anxiety to kind of ball up. And now it can, because now you've shed some light on it. Now you've essentially accepted it as a part of you. You accepted that that is something that is there. Because you did that, your anxiety can come up, and you just breathe out. You can let it go. You can kind of essentially just exhale all of it. Now, it doesn't need to fully make sense, but this process works. The key here is you need to acknowledge the fact that your anxiety is there, and you need to acknowledge the fact that it is potentially hurtful. And then you need to thank it, because again, it's not there to hurt you. It's there to help you. It's there to guide you through tough times, but sometimes it might be misguided itself. And so you need to thank it for what it's doing, but you need to gently nudge it out of you, and you need to let that anxiety go. And this essentially just tells your brain, cool, I got this. I acknowledge that that is a concern that we as a body have, but it's okay. I got it, because it's not a big deal. And then you let it go. Now, again, this is my own way of dealing with this, but I think so many people talk about running away from it, of pushing it down, of pushing it aside, rather than coming from this frame of love, rather than loving your anxiety. Now, you can agree with me, you can disagree with me, but if you think that this is all makes sense, the next time you're anxious, instead of coping with it, instead of pushing it away, maybe try with a little bit of compassion. Forgive it for what it's doing, and more importantly, forgiving yourself. Because that's ultimately what this is. This is forgiving yourself for whatever it is that you're doing. Now, if you've made it this far, please consider hitting that subscribe button, because I will have a lot of these goodies coming for you in the very near future. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.